10 days after the ground tore open beneath western Colombia, the number everyone has been watching just climbed again, and it climbed in a way that shows this disaster is still nowhere near finished unfolding. The death toll from the earthquake that struck on August 10th has now risen to at least 304 people, according to the latest confirmed figures, with more than 45. 100 others injured, and over 420 people still listed as missing. This is the updated picture of exactly how much worse this earthquake has become since it first struck, and what comes next for a country now facing one of the largest reconstruction efforts in its modern history. Let's start with the basics of what actually happened, because the scale of this event caught even seismologists off guard. On the morning of August 10th, at 7:34 local time, a powerful earthquake ruptured beneath the department of Chocó in western Colombia. The United States Geological Survey initially measured it at magnitude 7.4, while Colombia's own Geological Survey and the Global Centroid Moment Tensor Project later placed it slightly higher at magnitude 7.5. The epicenter sat just outside the small town of San José del Palmar, a community of under 5,000 people, roughly 250 miles west of Bogotá, at a depth of around 60 miles beneath the surface. That depth matters more than people realize because an earthquake this deep spreads its energy across a much wider surface area than a shallow quake of the same size would, which helps explain why the shaking was felt as far away as Ecuador and Panama, hundreds of miles from where the rupture actually occurred. Colombia's Geological Service confirmed this was the strongest earthquake to strike the country in the 21st century, and one of the strongest recorded there in decades. The rupture itself was caused by strike-slip faulting, meaning two blocks of crust ground horizontally past each other, rather than one sliding directly beneath the other, along a fault system running through one of the most seismically complex regions of South America, a corner of the continent where the Nazca, Caribbean, and South American tectonic plates all interact in ways scientists are still working to fully map out. If you're finding this update useful, go ahead and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this kind of coverage reach the people who need accurate information rather than outdated headlines. Now, let's walk through exactly how the death toll has evolved since that first morning, because the trajectory itself tells an important story about how a disaster like this actually unfolds in real time. In the earliest hours after the quake, officials reported around 20 confirmed deaths, a number that always represents only the very beginning of an unfolding tragedy rather than anything close to the final count. By Monday evening, that figure had climbed past 100, with officials confirming at least 111 dead and dozens more injured. Tuesday brought a sharper jump, with the confirmed toll rising to 224, including 95 deaths in Cali alone, the country's second largest city, according to its mayor. By Wednesday, the number had pushed past 250, with authorities reporting 101 deaths in Pereira and 95 in Cali specifically. Thursday saw the toll climb again to 281, alongside a staggering damage assessment, nearly 4,000 injured and 379 people still unaccounted for at that point. That pattern, a toll that keeps climbing steadily for days rather than plateauing quickly, is unfortunately typical of major earthquakes striking areas with significant building collapse, since search and rescue teams often need extended time to reach every affected structure, particularly in more remote or mountainous terrain. And that's precisely what happened here. By August 16th, roughly a week after the initial rupture, Colombia's National Disaster Management Agency had confirmed 289 deaths, with the number of missing sitting at 143. Now, as of the most recent update, that figure has climbed to at least 304 confirmed dead, with more than 420 people still missing, a jump that reflects both ongoing recovery efforts and the difficult, painstaking process of formally confirming identities in the hardest-hit communities. It's worth understanding why identifying victims takes this long in the first place, because it isn't simply a matter of pulling bodies from rubble. Officials working through Colombia's forensic and prosecutorial systems, including the country's Fiscalia and Medicina legal agencies, have had to cross-check names against hospital records, missing persons reports filed by relatives, and physical remains recovered from collapsed structures, a process that inevitably produces revisions as new information comes in. At one point, the reported toll actually dipped slightly, from 294 down to 289 after officials cross-referenced competing reports and removed duplicate entries, a reminder that these figures reflect a genuinely careful verification process rather than simple headline counting. The scale of physical destruction behind these numbers is genuinely staggering. More than 170 buildings collapsed outright during the initial shaking. Nearly 13,000 homes have been destroyed entirely, with well over 127,000 more homes damaged to varying degrees across the affected region. A pedestrian bridge collapsed, 20 separate road bridges sustained damage, and more than 200 roads were affected badly enough to disrupt movement of both residents and emergency crews. 5 airports, including major hubs in Cali, Pereira, Manizales, and Quibdó, suspended operations in the immediate aftermath, severely complicating the initial flow of aid and rescue personnel into the region. 44 separate aqueduct systems sustained damage as well, leaving entire communities without reliable access to clean water at exactly the moment they needed it most. Geographically, the destruction has concentrated most heavily around 3 areas: the city of Cali, the city of Pereira, and the surrounding coffee-growing region often called the Eje Cafetero, along with the more remote and difficult-to-access department of Chocó near the earthquake's actual epicenter. Chocó, in particular, has posed enormous logistical challenges for rescue. Crews, since much of the region is reachable only by boat or small aircraft, winding through dense jungle terrain that makes even routine humanitarian access difficult under normal circumstances, let alone in the days immediately following a major disaster. Local officials in Chocó's capital, Quibdó, described injuries and severe structural damage spreading across the department, with communication lines down in several rural areas for hours after the initial shaking, leaving families unable to even confirm whether loved ones in outlying villages had survived. Colombia's newly inaugurated president, Abelardo de la Espriella, who took office only days before the earthquake struck, has led the emergency response directly, touring devastated communities and announcing a series of economic relief measures for the hardest hit regions, including a 3-month package of financial support specifically targeted at the coffee-growing region around Pereira and Risaralda. Speaking from Pereira early in the crisis, he described the emotion-el weight of walking through a city center reduced to rubble and framed the relief measures as, in his words, a breath of air in the middle of the tragedy. His administration has faced this crisis as its very first major test, barely a week into office, a genuinely difficult way for any new government to begin. International support arrived quickly and from a genuinely wide range of countries. The United States pledged more than $15 million in aid and began deploying disaster response teams within a day of the quake. Mexico sent military aircraft carrying along with security personnel, with additional shipments and specialist rescue teams placed on standby for deployment if needed, including a further 255 military specialists and 20 search dogs ready to mobilize on short notice. Within Colombia itself, private philanthropy stepped in at a remarkable scale, with the Galinsky family, one of the country's most prominent business dynasties, donating roughly 150 billion Colombian pesos, close to $48 million US, specifically earmarked for rebuilding efforts in Cali. Volunteers across the country organized supply collection drives in stadiums and community centers, packing donated food, water, and blankets bound for the hardest hit departments. There's an important, sobering detail buried inside all of this that deserves real attention, because it connects this tragedy to one from Colombia's own past. Back in January of 1999, a magnitude 6.1 earthquake struck this same general coffee-growing region, killing more than 1,100 people and destroying tens of thousands of homes, with the city of Armenia bearing the overwhelming brunt of both the deaths and the damage. That earlier disaster prompted Colombia to build out significant earthquake preparedness infrastructure over the following decades, including regular evacuation drills conducted in major cities like Bogotá, Medellín, Barranquilla, and Cali. Those preparations almost certainly saved lives this time around, but the fact that this new earthquake struck some of those very same communities again, more than 2 decades later, has understandably reopened old grief for residents who remember the 1999 disaster firsthand. Looking ahead, seismologists studying the region have offered a careful, measured assessment of what comes next. Rodrigo Leon Loya, a seismologist and geosciences professor at the University of the Andes, has pointed out that while the probability of another earthquake of similar magnitude striking this exact same area again soon remains relatively low, he wouldn't rule out continued seismic activity, given how many active fault lines run through Colombia's geography. As he put it, the real question facing the country isn't really whether another significant earthquake will eventually happen somewhere along one of these fault systems, but simply when. A sobering framing for a country already exhausted from a decade of recurring seismic scares. That reality is already shaping how officials are approaching the reconstruction phase now getting underway. With nearly 185,000 people affected across roughly 450 municipalities spanning 15 different departments, the scale of rebuilding required here extends far beyond simply replacing collapsed structures. Officials have specifically emphasized the need to rebuild with stronger, more resilient construction standards this time, rather than simply restoring what existed before, given both the region's documented earthquake history and the growing body of seismic research, suggesting these fault systems remain more active than older models once assumed. For the families still waiting on updates about missing loved ones, and for entire communities now facing months or years of rebuilding, the number 304 is not an abstraction. It's the latest painful confirmation of just how much this disaster has grown since that first Monday morning update put the toll at only 20. Every subsequent revision upward has represent real people, real families, and real communities absorbing devastating news in stages rather than all at once, the way major disasters so often unfold in the real world, rather than the neat, single headline version most of us encounter from a distance. Behind each new number sits a specific name, a specific address, a specific family still checking their phone for a message that may never arrive, a reality easy to lose sight of when the story gets reduced to a single rising statistic scrolling across a screen. If you want to stay updated as this recovery effort continues, and as search teams work through the remaining missing persons cases, subscribing means you won't miss the next update the moment new figures come in. Because, based on the pattern we've already seen over these past 10 days, this almost certainly will not be the final revision to a death toll that has climbed steadily, painfully, and repeatedly since the ground first shook beneath western Colombia.